Hello, my name is Blaise Van Ord, and my topic is Chennault's Flying Tigers. Who are they? They're American pilots who fought for China during the war between China and Japan and during World War II. They fought to protect China from Japan and keep them from advancing. They were led by Claire Chennault, and they were first known as the American Volunteer Group before they were given their nickname, the Flying Tigers. Their fighter planes can be recognized by the shark faces that have been painted on the planes, as you can kind of see in the background of this picture. Claire Chennault grew up in Louisiana, and at a young age he wanted to be a soldier. In 1909, he attended Louisiana State University studying agriculture because that's what his father did. At a Louisiana State Fair, he saw someone flying a plane and fell in love with fighter planes. Even though he fell in love with this, he went into a career of teaching. When World War I began, Chennault tried to become a pilot. He was unfortunately rejected because he did not have a high enough level education. They were only taking people who went to universities such as Harvard. Though this happened, he was able to get flying lessons from a flight officer, and so he was at least able to learn to fly a plane. After this happened in 1920, he was able to get a permanent commission in the Air Service. Around that time, he also caught the Spanish flu, which was common with soldiers during World War I. According to doctors, he was supposed to die in the morning, but he survived. He believed that God had kept him alive for a great purpose. Claire Chennault ended up impressing senior flight instructor Ernest Allison, and Allison taught Claire Chennault acrobatic flying. And by 1932, Claire Chennault was one of the most experienced pilots. He ended up becoming an instructor at the Air Corps Tactical School, where he actually had some disagreements with other instructors about if bombers were the best or if fighter planes could take down bombers, because during that time most people believed that bombers were the future, that nothing would be able to stop them. But Claire Chennault believed that if fighter planes acted together, they could take out bombers. While at the Air Corps Tactical School, Chennault had some arguments with other instructors about what types of planes were the best. A lot of instructors believed that bomber planes were the future and that they cannot be stopped, while Chennault argued that fighter planes, when used correctly, could take down bombers and be very effective. He understood the importance of fighter planes and working together. He had ideas such as guerrilla fighting and going up in the air and attacking from above on bomber planes to take them out. Claire Chennault helped start the Army's first acrobatic flying team. The tryouts for this team were to stay on Chennault's wing for 30 minutes while doing acrobatic tricks. This was such a hard task that only 3 people actually passed. 2 of them were William McDonald and John Williamson. They flew Boeing P-12 airplanes, and their act was known as the Flying Trapeze. By 1934, they were traveling around the country and became a very popular attraction. They were known as some of the best acrobatic flyers around the US. The trapezers' acrobatic skills caught the eye of Colonel P.T. Mo, who wanted them to train China's Air Force. At first, they declined, but Mo persisted and they accepted the invitation. Chennault left for China on May 8th, 1937. He met with Madame Chang, who is in on the right in the picture above. On the left is Chiang Kai-shek. Chennault's job was going to be to observe the Air Force bases and report on the condition of the pilots in the planes. The Italians at that time had been helping with the Air Force, and Chennault said that the Italians did all they could to sabotage China because that is how bad the Air Force was. When war between Japan and China broke out, Chennault offered up his voluntary services to China. He was excited about this opportunity because he would have a chance to test his ideas and to shape history. The first mission that he directed went badly, though, when bombs missed their target and killed and wounded civilians. And then on December 7, 1937, Chennault was evacuated from Nanking. And this is a cool fact because it connects to what we've learned in our class about the rape of Nanking, and it kind of shows how close Chennault was to that event because it's kind of hard to compare him to other events around World War II, and this kind of shows where he was at in when he was doing things around the time of World War II. On November 15, 1940, Chennault and Sung launched the Campaign for Planes and Pilots in China. Chennault's idea was to use American planes and a corps of American pilots to build a fighting air force under Chiang Kai-shek to fight against Japanese forces in China. At first, they were told they could possibly get outdated planes, but then they were able to make a proposal for 500 planes. 200 would be bombers and 300 would be fighters, which could be staffed by foreign pilots, or Chennault said needed to be staffed by foreign pilots. On December 21, they discussed with Secretary Morgenthau about getting American pilots that could be paid $1,000 a month. And as you can see on the top picture, that is Sung and Senator Morgenthau discussing the issue. The planes that Chennault was looking at were P-40 airplanes. They made a plan that they could get those from the Universal Trading Corporation set up by the US to aid China. This had to be completely commercial on paper, though, and kept a secret because at the time the US did not want to start a war with Japan, which is kind of funny because they end up doing it anyways. But by keeping it a secret, they were hoping that that would not happen. So, as I said before, um, pilots could be paid $1,000 a month to fight in China. This group of pilots, American pilots that would fight in China, were known as the American Volunteer Group. The money was a big reason why a lot of them took up this opportunity, but for others, it was about the adventure because it would be something new, and for some people, it was something fun that they wanted to do and make an adventure out of it. In the picture, you can see one of the P-40 planes, and the details on it are the shark, which ends up becoming the Flying Tigers logo on all their planes. That was created by one of the American volunteer group members when they saw an image of a different group that had a design on their plane, and it gave them the idea to draw teeth on it, and then they drew an eye, and they thought it looked like a shark. Somehow, when they were named the Flying Tigers, they misunderstood that it was a shark and maybe not a tiger, and so it's kind of ironic as well. The AVG's first battle took place on December 1941. Their goal was to intercept bombers that were headed for Kunming, and part of Kunming can be seen in the background here. Chennault said that the pilots held the fate of China on that day, and the goal of, or the strategy of the pilots was to not get into any dogfights because the P-40 planes weren't necessarily great in dogfights. But their goal was to dive up into the sun and then back down on the enemy. And the second squadron actually spotted the bombers first. That squadron was led by Jack Newkirk. But Newkirk ended up firing too early and missing, and then his guns locked up or stopped firing, and so he ordered his squadron to turn back. And that's when Charlie Bond, leading the first squadron, saw the bombers and chased them down. The Japanese bombers were known as Lily bombers. They had machine guns on the nose, the back, and the rear to protect from the American planes. And the Americans split up the attack. They attacked from different angles and basically dived all around them and shot at them. Two bombers were smoking and lagged behind the others. Some of the pilots had what they called buck fever, where their guns locked up because of how intense the first battle is. Kind of like you're going hunting with how the adrenaline kicks up, and sometimes you can make a mistake because the adrenaline is so high. The squadron, like I said, chased them down. They downed at least 4 bombers. No Americans were lost in the battle, but at first, Ed Rector was thought he was missing because he had ran out of fuel and crash landed. He got a ride back to Kunming and basically surprised everyone. And so once he returned, they could say for sure that no American was lost in their first battle. On December 12th, the 3rd Squadron battled Japanese bombers in Rangoon. The 3 P-40s rushed right toward the bombers while 3 came in from the side. They damaged and shot down some bombers, but others succeeded in bombing Rangoon, and there was devastation to the area, and this awakened some of the pilots to the realities of war because this was one of their first battles in China, and it really was a wake-up call to them. So 3 people after the battle that were missing were Paul Green, Henry Gilbert, and Neil Martin. Paul Green ended up showing up later that day, so he was found, but the other 2 were found dead. And so this was like the first real battle. This was the first battle where AVG members died, and was just a huge wake-up call to what the rest of the war might be like. On Christmas Day, Japanese planes were spotted. The plane Chennault told to the pilots was orbit hometown Angels 15, which means that 4 P-40s would fly above Rangoon at 15,000 feet. They circled for 30 minutes and did not see anything. And then eventually they spotted a few dozen bombers above them, and behind those bombers were a few Japanese fighter planes. The AVG pilots had to fly up to the enemy, even though they were told the strategy was to come down on them from above, but that wasn't an option there. And a few of the planes got caught in dogfights, which is something you don't want to happen, but that's just the kind of battle it was. It was estimated that about 15 Japanese fighters and 9 bombers were downed in that fight. Also on Christmas Day, George McMillan was on a patrol when he came in contact with bombers. His engine was damaged, and he even had a bullet hit and crack the windshield, but that was after he ended up downing 3 Japanese bombers, which I believe was a record for that battle. He crashed and was found by the local Burmese people. Um, on the way back, he found a downed Japanese plane and took a Japanese saber as a special token. And he arrived back at the base at 9 p.m. And also later on Christmas Day, Ed Overin returned also from a crash that he had during the battle. And these crashes, what I found with these crashes from the research I've done on this topic is that they happen quite frequently. And if you were a part of the American Volunteer Group, this was something that you would get used to because people would go missing all the time, and you would just have to keep focusing on battles, not knowing if they were dead or if they would come back. And so this was a huge mental part of the fighting that you would have to learn to try to get used to. After Rangoon fell on March 7, the AVG moved to Burma in a small town called Magwi, and there Bill Reed and Ken Jernstedt wanted to go on a reconnaissance mission, and they were given the okay to do so. They left on March 18, 1942, and they found a landing strip with 30 Japanese planes. They ended up attacking the planes in the airfield and surprised them. They received no anti-aircraft fire. Like, they didn't see anything go by. That's how surprised um the Japanese were. Like, they did not expect them at all. Um After their success there, they moved on to a main base at Lomine, and they took out 15 Japanese planes there. Jernstedt had 7, and Reed took out 8. They said that most of those planes were covered with camouflage, and they were still able to destroy them. On March 24, 1942, pilots including Newkirk, Neal, Boynton, and Bond were at a Royal Air Force Base getting ready for a raid on the Japanese. They left at 5:49 a.m. and they could barely see in the dark, but that was the reason they flew at the time they did. Uh, Four P-40s attacked the airfield once they found it, while two pilots provided air cover up top. And one of those pilots up top was McGarry, but his plane um, was damaged and he ended up crashing in Japan-occupied Thailand. And that was another one of those instances where someone crashes and you just can't do anything about it. The people around him tried dropping him stuff that he could use, but they couldn't really do much else to help him out. Another group of pilots um, had found the Chiang Mai airfield after it had already been destroyed by the other group, and it had also been set on fire. Uh, on the second group, Newkirk ended up crashing when they were attacking armored cars. Um, it is uncertain why Newkirk crashed or how it happened, but the crash killed Newkirk, and it was a big and sad loss for the Flying Tigers. So in late March of 1942, Tongu fell, and the AVG pilots, now also starting to be known as the Flying Tigers, moved into a Camco facility. This place was way nicer than the place in Magui that they had recently been at. It wasn't dirty, it was way nicer for them. And on April 6th, R.T. Smith led the group into battle. Viewers that were in the trenches said that the battle looked like a movie and even better than a movie. Claire Chennault had been trying to get P-40E Kitty Hawks um, from the US that they could use to fight with. As you can see on the right, this is what they look like. They would be better than the P-40s that they had before, and Chennault really wanted these because he had started to get um, concerned by the advancements that Japan had made. And at this time, he had a crew of 114 members, and so he needed to use them as wisely as possible. He assembled 8 pilots from the first squadron to go to Paoshan. They were there to try and stop the Japanese from penetrating the southern tip of China. And on May 4, Japanese aircraft were spotted there, and they were in a V formation of 25 Japanese bombers. And the bombers ended up targeting a refugee area and creating a lot of destruction. One of the pilots, Bond, ended up crashing in a cemetery, and it was just a dangerous and destructive battle. Chennault received permission from Madame Chang to destroy a bridge at the Salween River around the Salween Gorge. He believed that this was one of the last chances to stop Japan from advancing through China. On May 7, 1942, 4 pilots were sent to attack the Salween Gorge. They dropped bombs, trapping armor and equipment and destroying it. Another bombing attack on May 8th happened, which also destroyed trucks carrying pontoons. Raids carried on for several days along the gorge and the Burma Road. and ended up being very successful. The Flying Tigers did this very well and ended up making history and just saving the day and preventing Japan from advancing. They brought them to a complete halt. And Roosevelt even said that they just did an outstanding job. And so Roosevelt said the outstanding gallantry and conspicuous daring of the American volunteer group, combined with their almost unbelievable efficiency, is a source of tremendous pride throughout the whole of America. Um, while Chennault believed this was just to try to get um, the soldiers to want to keep fighting, the Flying Tigers did believe this was a great honor and were very proud of their efforts. It was very quiet after that raid, and not much else happened. That was basically the highest point of the Flying Tigers' time. And pilots would be free to leave once they survived until July 4, 1942, which is Independence Day. Pilots were tried to be recruited into the U.S. Army. Most of the Flying Tigers or AVG men wanted to head home. Only 5 pilots were actually accepted the induction into the Army because most of them just wanted to get home. They missed some of the special things they got to do in America that they missed while they were in China, and it was just too much for them to stay any longer. Clerkenal actually ended up staying and joining the army again, and he said that he had worked for 5 years, and so he joined the army after 5 years of work with the group and working in China. And like I said, not many of the pilots joined them because they just thought it would be better in America and missed what they used to have. So the press had reported that the Flying Tigers had shot down or burned 284 Japanese planes with more damage. Uh, Chennault said that he had felt their records were better than they had been given, and that people under um, underdid the records and stats that they actually had. The Tigers had been predicted to not even last 3 weeks, but ended up lasting for 7 months over Burma, China, and Thailand, destroying over 299 Japanese planes, with another 153 probably destroyed. And some people have said that they think those numbers were way over the top, but the Tigers stayed by those numbers and believe that that is actually what they had. So one of my sources um, was about it's called Chennault's Trapezers. It's about when Chennault was a part of the Flying Trapeze and what he did. I got a lot of the information on the Flying Trapeze from this. It was very cool what he did, and I would recommend like looking more into this if you want to learn more about what he did before he went to China. I just decided to focus more on the Flying Tigers because that was my topic, but there is also a lot more to learn about the Flying Trapeze. The untold story of the American pilots who waged a secret war against Japan was a source that I used that was a really good book. It was really long, but thorough with all the information that it had on the Flying Tigers. It walked through the life of Chennault and what he was like growing up, all the way through all the specific battles that the Flying Tigers faced. It went into specifics on what happened to um, pilots and what each pilot had to face. And it took information from the journals and diaries that pilots wrote. And so it was overall just a really good book and a source that I use for nearly all of my slides. Here are some of my other sources. So the top one, Chennault Guerrilla of the Air, I used to learn more about the tactics that Chennault used, like how he believed that fighter planes could take out bombers, while during that era, most people believed that bombers were the next great thing, that nothing could take them out, nothing could take them down. But using the strategies such as going up high in the air and diving down on the bombers, um, Chennault was able to prove them wrong and show that using fighter planes well, they could take down bombers. The second down source, the 23rd Tactical Fighter Wing Flying Tigers, I just use that to learn more about the Tigers overall, like who was a part of them and what they did. The third one, America Air Strategy in China, I also use to learn more about the type of style of fighting they did, like the guerrilla fighting, like the source on the top talked about as well. The return of the Flying Tigers was interesting because it was from the point of view of a new group that was being based off of the Flying Tigers, and it kind of talked about the new pilots describing the stories and legends they have heard from the original Flying Tigers. And so that was really cool to help understand what people thought of the Tigers now. Thank you for watching this presentation. I really enjoyed working on it. It was fun to learn about the Flying Tigers. It sparked my interest in fighter planes, in the strategy and use of them in World War II. One thing I really enjoyed learning about was the fighting in a different country such as China. Like, I feel like we always think about um, World War II being in Germany and Europe, but it really happened all around the world. That's why it's called World War II. And I think people just need to look more into those other places, such as China, to see what happened. And it was just really cool to understand. And thank you for letting me share this with you. And thank you for watching.